This morning I met my 20-year-old self for coffee. I showed up early like I always do now, black coffee in hand, no sugar, no doubt. He showed up late, still stuck in a haze, eyes bloodshot, lost in his face. Man, you look old, he smirks through the fog. Sober LA, what happened, found God? I smile because the truth is just too deep. I traded his chaos for a life I could keep. No weed, no booze, no fun, he spits. What do you even do, like taxes and sit? I grin because it's easier than the fight. Now I run ultra marathons and sleep well at night. His jaw dropped, disbelief sharp and cold. You mean to tell me we got boring and grew old? No, I replied, we learned how to live. We stopped taking and learned how to give. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. I'm out of options, can you spot me some dough? I shook my head, kept my voice like stone. You won't learn a thing if I lob you a bone. But change is coming, it's not far away. I push back my chair, I grab my cup. No rescue speech, no helping him up. Just one last glance as I walk to the door, the kid I once was, but not anymore. It was a hot September day in 2016. I was visiting my girlfriend at the University of Rhode Island, and I was looking forward to another night of Xanax, alcohol, cocaine, weed, Molly, just a light night. I was sitting there rolling a joint, one of my few proud talents at the time, when my phone started to ring. It was my dad. What I didn't know was my whole life was about to change. Let me rewind. My name is Trey Herlitz-Ferguson, and I'm a recovering anxious, depressed, self-sabotaging, codependent addict and alcoholic. I grew up in Westchester, New York. My mom was a successful investor, and my dad worked in finance. My parents got divorced when I was 3, and I grew up living with my mom primarily. My whole childhood, I was quietly anxious but socially popular. At some point along the way, I realized, hey, if I get celebrated for what I do and I make a lot of friends, then I must be doing something right. And that was a programming that I embodied for the years that followed. When I got to high school, my pursuit of sports and wanting to be celebrated allowed me to actually take on ice hockey, which was something that I was very proud of and very passionate about. It became my dream to play hockey at the highest level, and it landed me at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. I like to say that this school really only specialized in toxic, unhealthy, rich kids masked by a decent reputation for academic excellence. When I showed up on campus, my ego was inflated. I was a year older than the other freshmen after completing a postgraduate year at a prep school, and I was ready to get the season started. Confidence was high, and I was ready to go. Unfortunately, right before the season started, I broke my foot, also known as identity loss. I lost the one thing that anchored my identity, and all that confidence that I was carrying was now gone. I quickly reverted back to the lost, scared, insecure, lonely boy that I was masking for years. It was in that moment that I had a choice, but I was incapable of being able to sit in the discomfort of accepting that I don't know who I was, and so naturally, I dove into the party scene. For the freshman year, I enjoyed about 4 to 5 nights a week of partying, smoking weed every single day. Adderall was the only way that I can get any work done, and I rarely showed up to class. As you can imagine, this was not sustainable for a college student. After that summer, I showed back up for sophomore year, made it about 2 weeks into school, went on a bender, ended up depressed, isolated, alone in my room, and I decided to call my dad. I dropped out and I moved back home. At this point, the only option I had was to move into my dad's basement because my mom had already kicked me out 3 years prior. She had already caught on to the way that I was living, and she told me this. She said, honey, I love you way too much to support the lifestyle that you're living, but when you're ready, I'll be there. At the time that she told me that, she was challenging the one thing that I believed was keeping me alive, my addiction. And something about being an addict is it's a full-time job and it's all about business. When it calls, I have to answer. And so when she told me that, naturally, I had to dismiss her, resent her, curse her out, and choose not to talk to her for the years that followed. Back to this hot September day. Pick up the phone, and my dad tells me, if you're not gonna work, you can't stay at our house. I was very quick to let him know that I was okay with that, and I hung up. I just finished smoking my joint when the reality of the situation I had so gladly just signed up for presented itself. I was in Rhode Island. I had less than $10 in my pocket, no train ticket home, My plan, I'll just live in my girlfriend's dorm. Not an option. She was very quick to tell me she was in a small dorm room with 2 roommates, and I had about 2 days left. So I broke down. I started to cry. I realized I had nowhere to go, and I was now homeless. And in that moment when I was sitting there, my mom's voice began to echo in my head. When you're ready for serious help, I'll be there. So like any good kid, I came up with a plan. I'll BS my way through some rehab so that my mom will bankroll my lifestyle again. So I picked up the phone and I called my mom, and she picked up like she always does, no matter what. Honey, what's wrong? What do you mean by real help? What does that look like? She said a real program with real structure, and she sent me a few to check out. So I picked up the phone and I called place after place, trying to find the one that'd be the quickest and easiest to manipulate. The first 2 I called varied in length from 3 months to 6 months. No way. The third place I called was a program named Legacy Outdoor Adventures, a wilderness therapy program in Utah. After listening to the guy's spiel for about 10 minutes, I asked him straight up, what's the fastest anyone has ever gotten through here? What I didn't know then that I know now is he lied to me and said 7 weeks. I said, sounds good, I'll see you tomorrow. Gave myself one last night of pushing the limits of what my body could handle, and I woke up in the morning with the joint burning, Uber ordered, and I was on my way. When I got off the plane in Salt Lake City, Utah, and got met by the staff of the program and driven 3 hours into the desert, all I could think about is, where am I going? What is this place? And how can I get back as quickly as possible? I remember when I got to the program, I got there a night early. At Legacy, you would go out for 5 days of camping, and 2 days you'd be back at base camp doing therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, cooking, life skills. I was at the base camp before the guys came back, so I had a night to kind of settle in, get myself ready, get myself into character so that I could work my way through this program, people please, and do what I need to get out of there as fast as I could. Next morning I wake up and there's a bunch of exhausted guys coming into the dorms, and I start to see who had been there for a while and who was new like myself. The new guys hated the place. They only had bad advice to give me, and they resented being there. They provided no value. The older guys had leadership. They had vulnerability, and they're able to meet me with compassion for where I was at and make me feel at home in this new, strange place. There was something about this guy named Joe who laid out the law of the land for me that I really loved. It was his leadership and his vulnerability, and I didn't know it then, but that was something that I wanted to embody. I looked up to him. He showed me what a man could look like. Over the next couple weeks, it wasn't easy, but on my first camping trip, I was asked to tell my life story in front of the group. We were sitting in the woods. It was actually hailing. I thought we were going to go back to base camp, but they told me to grab my jacket. And I sat there and I told my life story for about an hour. And there's a quote that I referenced today. You can't see the picture from inside the frame. It was in that moment that the power of that quote really spoke to me. I was so caught up in the way I was living that I couldn't see the downward spiral that I was headed on to certain death over the last 2 years. Forgot to mention earlier, before I made the decision to go and my dad kicked me out, I ended up in the hospital twice. Once for a panic attack that ended with me hitting my head on a rock because I couldn't handle it, and another for an overdose on Xanax. And the insanity about addiction that I want to highlight is the day after I got out of the hospital for an overdose, I needed Xanax to cope with that feeling. It makes no sense, but it did to me. You can't see the picture from inside the frame. After sharing my story, I started to step out of mine. I started to realize that I was headed nowhere fast and something had to change. My heart began to open. Over the weeks that followed, it wasn't easy. Everything about Legacy was safely uncomfortable. I didn't want to do the things, but I had to. And what I realized is that nothing grows in my comfort zone, and stepping outside of it is the only way I'll truly heal. One of the biggest issues that I was personally working through was my anxiety and my codependency. I had an extreme unhealthy attachment to a girl back home, and so that was an area that they used to kind of leverage and get underneath what was really going on. One of the tools they used was to deliberately instigate my anxiety, and it would look something like this. It would be a Friday night, it'd be about 9 p.m., we'd be sitting around the fire, and one of the staff would come up to me and say, hey, it's 11 p.m. in Rhode Island, what do you think your girlfriend's doing? In the beginning, as you can imagine, I would lose it. I would puff my chest, I'd want to get into fights, and I would have panic attacks. But as they continued to do it, I started to build the muscle of accepting the fact that no amount of worry will change an outcome. I have to focus on what's in my control and what's in my present. After weeks and weeks and weeks of doing this, it wouldn't affect me anymore. It was the 8th week. We came back to base camp. My therapist tells me to meet him in his office. When I walk in, he's sitting there looking out the window, and it looked like we needed to switch seats, like he was going through something. He said, "Trey, I'm worried about you. You've been doing really good work here, but I'm afraid you're going to react to this in a poor way." I said, "Sorry, Derek, this doesn't work on me anymore. Nice try." He hands me a letter. The girl that I had been dating was breaking up with me. And in that moment, all of the work that I had done, I quickly regressed back to that scared, lonely, angry boy who showed up a few weeks prior. I cursed out my therapist. I stormed out of the building. I ran behind one of the dorm buildings that we would live in. I broke into a staff's car and stole a tent. I proceeded to walk about a mile, and I pitched it. No plan, just angry. I got into this tent, and for 3 nights and 4 days, I refused to get out, I refused to eat, and I refused to speak to anybody. If anyone would come check on me, I would stick a middle finger out of the tent, the slit in the door, and threaten to fight anybody if they tried to come in. On the 4th day, the guys were now off on their camping trip, and at Legacy, they have a no-contact policy, which just meant that they had a staff that had to sit and babysit me and camp outside my tent. And on this 4th morning, my therapist, who is the spitting image of peace, comes and rips the tent door open, looks me in my eyes, and tells me to get in his truck. Out of just shock, I did what he said. I got in his truck and we started driving. The whole time that we were driving, I was plotting my escape. If we show up to this group of guys, it's an easy push on Derek, steal the keys, and I'm gone. To my surprise, that's not what happened. We drove on top of a mountain surrounded by a bunch of trees. We called them widow makers because they're pretty thin. He told me to get out. I got out of the truck. He went to the back, pulled out an axe, handed it to me. One of the craziest therapeutic interventions you can ever do with an AWOL'd 6'3" drug addict who's losing his mind. But he hands me the axe and he points at a tree and he said, "Knock it down." Confused, I did what he said because destruction sounded pretty great in this moment. And I started hammering away at this tree. And I remember as I was hitting it, chop after chop, it took a lot longer than I thought it would, all of my emotions started pouring out of me. My walls started to break down, and for the very first time, I felt a release that I'd never felt. It was one of the most profound therapeutic interventions I've ever had, and in that moment, when the tree fell down, I fell to my knees and I started crying. Derek came over to me, he gave me a hug, and we were able to move back into collaboration. It was later that day that he told me that he felt my time here was done, that I'd gotten what I needed, and that it was time for me to look into a transitional living program as my next step. That's what I did. I went from Legacy to a sober living in Ogden, Utah, where I spent the next year continuing to develop the skills that I needed to become the man that I am today. I put my recovery first. I prioritized fun. I got back to the things that I did when I was a kid. Skateboarding saved my life in this time. I had no greater plan. There was nothing I worried about. I worked a get-well job at Zoomies, and I skateboarded every single day. I went to my meetings and I worked a 12-step program. My time going through rehab really gave me an opportunity to sit and reflect and answer the question, who am I? For so long, that was rooted in what I did, not who I was. Recovery taught me that I have value just by who I am and how I can show up. Kindness matters, caring for others matters, and being a leader and someone that people can actually follow is far more important than the amount of success you could ever gain. Since leaving the program, I worked for and restructured a group home for young men in Ogden, Utah. I've worked for 2 different adolescent treatment centers where I've been able to work with over 100 boys and girls dealing with mental health and addiction. And I now live in LA where I run my own coaching program that continues to do the same. I'm in pursuit of disrupting negative thinking on as massive a scale as possible. And I'm very blessed and grateful to be here today. Thank you.